There's no room for you at the table, Agatha. Go sit out on the porch with the other guests. Claudia's words echoed through the hall like a slap, cutting through the soft music and elegant conversation filling my daughter Laura's home. The crystal chandeliers seemed to vibrate with the cruelty of those syllables, and my heart constricted as if an invisible hand squeezed it tight. 52 years of life, 30 years as a dedicated librarian, decades building cultural bridges in our city, and here I was, relegated to an outsider in my own daughter's house. The silence that followed was deafening. 23 people at my son-in-law's elegant anniversary dinner stopped breathing for a moment. I could feel curious glances turning towards me, some with pity, others with embarrassment, but none with the courage to challenge the hostess. My breath quickened, my vision blurred for a second, but something inside me, the strength that had sustained me through so many social battles, prevented me from collapsing right there. I rose silently, with the dignity I had learned to carry like invisible armor. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence is the most eloquent answer we can give. I crossed the hall with firm but silent steps, purposely avoiding Laura's gaze, who remained paralyzed in her chair, unable to defend her own mother. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but it reverberated in my soul like the sound of a drawer being closed forever. The night air embraced me like a comforting hug. The cobblestone streets of the town seemed to call me back to my origins, away from that world of appearances and false courtesies. My steps instinctively led me to the central square, where the old lampposts cast a golden light on the uneven stones. There, in front of City Hall, where I had so often spoken on social justice and cultural rights, I stopped to breathe. That's when I saw him. Peter emerged from the shadows like a ghost from the past, his hat slightly tilted, his eyes instantly recognizable after so many years. The mayor, my old comrade in arms, the one who had shared my dreams of social transformation when we were young idealists organizing book fairs and cultural initiatives. Our gazes met in a mutual recognition that dispensed with words. He tipped his hat in a respectful gesture, offered his arm for me to lean on, and the guards surrounding him instinctively recoiled, understanding that this was not a stranger, but someone entitled to the respect and protection of the most powerful man in the city. But to fully understand what happened on that transformative night, I need to go back in time and tell you how I got there. I grew up in a lower middle-class family, the daughter of a railroad worker and a seamstress who turned scraps into dreams. My mother always said that education was the only true inheritance they could leave me, and that's how I became a librarian, not by chance, but out of a passion for words and knowledge as a tool of liberation. At 22, I was already working at the city library, organizing not just books, but lives. It was there that children from humble families discovered worlds beyond their realities, where young people found inspiration to dream bigger. It was also in the library that I met Peter, then a young, recently graduated lawyer with ardent ideals of social justice. He always came on Thursdays, looking for books on public policy and community development. Our conversations began timidly among dusty shelves and old books, but soon transformed into long discussions about how we could transform our city into a more just and culturally rich place. Together, we created the city's first literary festival. I, with my network of contacts among local teachers and writers, he, with his political articulation skills and resources. We spent nights planning every detail, dreaming of a city where culture was accessible to everyone, not just the privileged. I remember the letters we exchanged, each envelope decorated with stamps that seemed to carry our hopes, invitations to a better future. Our first festival was a resounding success. The central square filled with book stalls, theatrical performances, poetry readings, and citizenship debates. I remember going up to the small makeshift stage, my heart pounding, but my voice firm and clear as I spoke about the importance of cultural participation as an exercise of citizenship. The applause I received that night wasn't just for me, but for an idea, the idea that every person, regardless of their social origin, had a right to beauty, knowledge, and expression. Peter and I became a recognized duo in the city. Not romantically, there was never anything but a deep friendship and intellectual partnership, but as symbols of a new generation that believed in transformation through culture and education. We organized dozens of events, created literacy programs for adults, and established reading circles in peripheral neighborhoods. It was during this golden age that I met Renato, a kind history teacher passionate about education. Our relationship blossomed naturally, built on shared values and similar dreams. We married in a simple but loving ceremony, with Peter as our best man. Lara was born 2 years later, a curious and intelligent child who grew up literally among books and ideals of social justice. For years, our family lived a simple but purposeful life. Renato taught history at the state high school, I continued my work at the library, and Lara grew up absorbing our values of equality, respect, and appreciation for culture. On weekends, our home became a meeting point for teachers, local artists, and cultural activists. Lara learned early on that our table always had a place for anyone who wanted to share ideas and dreams. Peter was a regular visitor to our home. He had become a respected lawyer, defending social causes and rural workers. Although he flirted with politics, he hadn't yet run for office. Our friendship remained strong, based on mutual respect and the continuation of our cultural projects. But life has a cruel way of testing our resilience when we least expect it. Renato fell ill when Lara was 15. An aggressive cancer consumed him in less than a year, leaving us devastated financially and emotionally. I had to take on 2 jobs, mornings at the library, afternoons tutoring, to keep our home and pay for Lara's education. Those were tough years in which I learned that a woman's strength can be greater than she ever imagines. Peter was a constant support during that difficult time. He helped us with Renato's treatment costs, found lawyers for inheritance issues, and ensured Lara could continue her studies. Lara, in turn, reacted to her father's loss unexpectedly. Instead of drawing closer to me, she began to distance herself, as if our simple life and middle-class values were responsible for our vulnerability. At 18, she received a scholarship to study business administration in the state capital, and there she discovered a world completely different from ours. It was at university that she met Claudio, the son of a prominent family with businesses in agribusiness. A polite and seemingly kind young man, but raised in an environment where social status was more important than character. When Lara brought him home to meet me, I immediately noticed the difference in his demeanor, the way he spoke, even the way he looked at me, not with disrespect, but with a kind of condescending pity. Their wedding was a grand celebration that made me feel like a stranger in my own daughter's life. Lara had transformed into a different version of herself, someone who seemed ashamed of her origins and desperate to fit into a world that wasn't ours. I tried to talk to her a few times, but her responses were always evasive, as if my presence was an inconvenient reminder of a past she preferred to forget. Claudio was, on the surface, respectful to me, but I could sense between the lines of our conversations that he saw my daughter as a social improvement project, a smart and beautiful young woman who, with the necessary adjustments, could become the perfect wife for his political aspirations. Because yes, Claudio had political ambitions. He constantly talked about running for city council, then for mayor, building a family dynasty in local power. And that's where Claudia entered the story. Claudia was Claudio's younger sister, a woman in her 30s, single, with a degree in marketing, and absolutely obsessed with the family's image. She had taken on the role of Claudio's unofficial image consultant, controlling every aspect of how the family was perceived publicly. Her first interactions with me were cordial, but I quickly sensed her discomfort with my presence. To Claudia, I represented everything that could damage the image she was trying to build for the family. A humble mother-in-law with a history of social activism, known in town for her sometimes controversial views on social justice. Worse still, I had a respected reputation in the local press. Journalists regularly sought me out for comments on cultural and educational issues, which gave me a platform she couldn't control. Claudia's first attempts to manage me were subtle. Suggestions on how I should dress at family events, comments about my political opinions being too radical, insinuations that it would be best for me to lay low so as not to harm Claudio's career. When she realized her suggestions weren't working, she began to gradually exclude me from family events. Laura unfortunately became complicit in this exclusion. My daughter, who grew up hearing about the importance of dignity and mutual respect, began to play along with her sister-in-law, prioritizing her acceptance in this new world at the expense of her relationship with me. Our encounters became increasingly rare and formal. When we did see each other, she seemed tense, as if my presence were an embarrassment that needed to be managed. Peter, meanwhile, had finally decided to enter politics. He ran for mayor and won, with a platform based on cultural development and social inclusion, many of the ideas we had developed together decades before. His political success should have been a source of joy for me, but strangely, it became yet another source of tension with Laura's family. Claudia saw Peter as a potential threat to Claudio's political plans. In the small town where we lived, there wasn't room for two prominent political figures, especially when one had a progressive platform that contrasted with the traditional conservatism that Claudio represented. Worse still, my long-standing friendship with Peter put me in Claudia's eyes on the enemy team. Things reached a breaking point when a local newspaper interviewed me about the new mayor's cultural programs. I publicly praised some of Peter's initiatives, commented on our historical partnership in similar projects, and expressed hope that the city finally had an administration committed to democratizing culture. The article was prominently featured, including a photo of me at the library next to some of the books from the first literary festival we organized. Claudia was furious. According to her, my political exposure could harm Claudio, who had not yet clearly positioned himself in relation to Peter's administration. There was a heated argument at Laura's house, in which Claudia demanded that I stop giving interviews and remain politically neutral. When I refused, arguing that I had a right to free speech, she declared that I was no longer welcome at family events as long as I insisted on getting involved in politics. Laura once again sided with her sister-in-law. In a painful and embarrassing conversation, my own daughter asked me to cooperate with family harmony and avoid public statements that could cause problems. When I asked if she really believed I should abandon my convictions to please people who barely knew me, she simply said that sometimes we have to make sacrifices for family. That's how I arrived at that humiliating evening. Claudia and Claudio's anniversary dinner was a significant event. Many local politicians would be present, potential allies and voters. Claudia had planned every detail to project the image of a prosperous, harmonious, and socially relevant family. My presence, with my reputation as an activist and my friendship with Peter, simply didn't fit into the script she had created. When I received the invitation, a part of me suspected it was some kind of trap. But a larger part, the one that still believed in the power of family love, hoped that maybe it would be an opportunity for reconciliation. I bought a new dress, chose a thoughtful gift, and arrived with my heart full of hope that maybe we could overcome our differences. The public humiliation was even worse than I could have imagined. Not only was I excluded from the main table, but I was categorized as an outsider guest, an expression Claudia used deliberately to put me on the same level as the household staff and distant acquaintances. It was a calculated display of power, a way of showing me exactly where my place was in this new family hierarchy. And that's why I found myself walking the city streets that night, heartbroken, but my spirit still unbroken. Peter didn't say a word as we walked up the marble steps of City Hall. His security detail kept a respectful distance, understanding that this was a private moment between old friends. Only when we reached his office, away from prying ears, did he finally speak. "Agatha," he said, his voice heavy with a sadness I immediately recognized. I looked at him in surprise. "How could you know?" He sighed deeply, removing his hat and running a hand through his graying hair. "Because Claudia contacted me 2 weeks ago. She wanted to ensure that I didn't show up at the dinner, that I didn't do anything that could compromise the family's political neutrality." I felt my stomach clench. "And what did you tell her?" "I said that I never interfered in anyone's personal life and didn't intend to start now, but I also made it clear that our friendship wasn't negotiable." He approached the window overlooking the square where our first literary festival had taken place so many years before. "She also told me that you were a problem that needed to be managed." Peter's words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Discovering that my exclusion had been planned, that my own family had conspired with others to humiliate me publicly, was more painful than the humiliation itself. "There's more," he continued, turning to me with a grave expression. "Claudia didn't act alone. She has the support of a group of influential people in the city who see our friendship as an obstacle to their political plans. They believe that by controlling you, they can weaken me politically." It was then that I understood the true scale of what was happening. It wasn't just about Laura or about family image. It was about power, about who controlled the city's political narrative, about who had the right to have a voice and influence. "They underestimated one fundamental thing," Peter said, a sad but determined smile forming on his face. "They underestimated you." And then he told me about his plan. The next day, Peter would deliver the opening speech of the city's second literary festival, a tradition we had interrupted during the difficult years after Renato's death, but which he had resumed as mayor. It would be a large event with regional press coverage, the presence of important politicians, and hundreds of citizens. And he wanted me to be the master of ceremonies. "You have a voice, Agatha," he said, putting his hand on my shoulder as we used to do in the old days. "And the people need to hear it. They tried to silence you, but we'll show them that's impossible." News of my reunion with Peter spread through the city like wildfire. Our historic friendship was well known, our cultural projects were fondly remembered, and many people had noticed my absence from recent public events. Cafeteria workers, shopkeepers, teachers, artists, all those who had benefited from our projects over the years began to mobilize. The next morning, there was already a small crowd in front of City Hall, people holding handmade signs, some with photos from the old literary festivals, others simply with messages of support. "We want Agatha back," some said. "Culture is everyone's right," declared others. Claudia was desperate. She called my house several times, leaving increasingly hysterical messages on my answering machine. In one, she even threatened me with consequences if I participated in the event. In another, she tried to emotionally blackmail me, saying that I was destroying the family and that Laura was suffering greatly from the situation. But it was Laura who finally showed up at my door on the afternoon of the festival. My daughter was visibly shaken. Deep, dark circles marked her face. Her hands trembled slightly. She entered uninvited and sat in the armchair where her father used to read the newspaper on Sunday mornings. "Mom," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "what are you doing?" I looked at her, this 30-year-old woman whom I still saw as my little girl, and felt a mix of love, pity, and disappointment. "I'm doing what I've always done, Laura. I'm standing up for what I believe in." "But you're destroying everything," she exploded, finally releasing the tension she'd been carrying. "Claudia could lose political opportunities because of this. The whole family is being affected. People are talking, speculating, creating conspiracy theories about our relationship with the mayor." "And what do you suggest I do?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the inner storm I felt. "That I disappear? That I cease to exist so as not to inconvenience the plans of people who barely know me? Laura fell silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice that broke my heart, she said, I suggest you think about your family. I am thinking about my family, I replied. I'm thinking about the woman I raised, the values I tried to teach her, the dignity I hope she's learned to cherish. I'm thinking about the legacy I want to leave for my future grandchildren, if I even have that opportunity. Laura began to cry, a silent, devastating cry. Mom, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know if I'm the daughter you raised or the wife Claudia wants me to be. I don't know if I can live in this world without giving up who I was, but I also don't know if I can go back. It was the most honest moment we'd had in years. I approached her and hugged her, feeling her fragility, her confusion, her fear. Laura, I whispered in her ear, you can be both. You can honor your origins and still build a new life, but you can't build that life on the humiliation of those who love you. We stayed embraced for a few minutes, mother and daughter trying to find a way back to each other. When she finally pulled away, her eyes were red but clearer. What are you going to say at the festival? She asked. I'm going to tell the truth, I replied. I'm going to talk about dignity, about respect, about the right of every person to have a voice. I'm going to talk about the values your father and I tried to teach you. I'm going to talk about the kind of city, the kind of world we want to build together. Laura nodded slowly. And if it costs us dearly, then we'll pay the price, I said. Because some things are more important than convenience, more important even than family peace, built on silencing and submission. If you're following the story and identify with the dilemmas of dignity and family I'm sharing, consider subscribing to this channel to continue receiving stories like this, where we explore the inner strength that all women carry, even in the most difficult moments. When I arrived at the square that night, I was impressed by the crowd that had gathered. Hundreds of people, many of whom I recognized from the old days of the literary festivals, others who were new faces but who carried the same hopeful energy I remembered from decades ago. Makeshift lanterns created a magical atmosphere, and the buzz of lively conversations filled the air with an almost palpable electricity. Peter found me backstage at the small stage that had been set up. He was elegant in his dark suit, but I could see the tension in his eyes. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked. I've never been so sure of anything in my life, I replied. That's when I saw her. Claudia had arrived with a group of supporters, wearing a crimson dress that made her stand out in the crowd like a bloodstain. She was surrounded by other prominent families in the city, some local politicians, people clearly uncomfortable with the popular energy of the event. Her face was tense, her eyes fixed on the stage with an expression of barely concealed hatred. But what struck me most was seeing Laura and Claudio among the audience. My daughter had chosen to stay, despite the pressures she had surely faced. Claudio seemed uncomfortable, constantly looking around as if searching for an escape, but remained beside his wife. Peter took the stage first to open the event. His speech was eloquent, speaking about the importance of culture as a tool for social inclusion, about the role of art in building a more just society. But the moment everyone was waiting for arrived when he called me to the stage. And now, he said, his voice echoing through the speakers across the packed square, I'd like to invite a woman who has dedicated her life to the democratization of culture in our city, a woman who believes that everyone deserves a voice, that everyone deserves respect, that everyone deserves a place at the table. Journey companion, partner in dreams, teacher to many of us, Agatha Ferreira. The applause was deafening. People shouted my name, whistled, clapped, with an energy that surprised me. I walked onto the stage with legs that trembled slightly, but with a firm and determined heart. I looked at the crowd, searched for familiar faces, allowed my eyes to meet Laura's for a moment. Then I took a deep breath and began to speak. Good evening, I said, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. Some of you have known me for decades. Others are seeing me for the first time. But you all share something with me. The dream of a city where every person matters, where every voice has value, where every citizen has the right to dignity. I paused, letting the words echo. I could see Claudia in the crowd, her face growing increasingly tense. 30 years ago, Peter and I started this city's first literary festival with a simple belief that culture is not a privilege for the few, but a right for all. We believed that in a just society, there are no outsider guests. There are only citizens with equal rights to participation, expression, and respect. The crowd began to murmur, some people nodding vigorously. I noticed many had understood the indirect reference to my humiliation the previous night. Over these years, I continued, I've learned that dignity isn't something given to us, it's something we carry within. I've learned that imposed silence isn't peace, but violence. I've learned that when they try to put us in our place, it's because our true place bothers them. Spontaneous applause erupted from the audience, but I wasn't finished. I've also learned, I said, my voice gaining strength, that family isn't about appearances. Family isn't about social status. Family isn't about protecting privileges at the expense of others' dignity. True family is about love, respect, mutual protection. True family is one that makes room at the table for everyone we love, not one that forces us to choose between love and dignity. It was at this moment that I saw Laura moving through the crowd. She was walking toward me, making her way through the people with determination. Claudia tried to grab her arm, but my daughter gently pulled away and continued walking. There are people in this city, I continued, looking directly at Claudia, who believe they can control us through fear, that they can silence us through emotional blackmail, that they can break us by forcing us to choose between our values and our relationships. But they are wrong. Laura had reached the foot of the stage. She looked at me with eyes shining with tears, but also with something I hadn't seen in years, pride. Pride in being my daughter. Because, I said, my voice now filled with emotion, some of us were raised to be unbreakable. Some of us were taught that dignity is non-negotiable. Some of us know that true love doesn't demand submission, but mutual courage. Peter approached me on stage, holding a red rose, a traditional symbol of our old festivals. But before he could hand it to me, Laura came on stage. The crowd fell silent, realizing that something significant was happening. My daughter walked to me, her eyes fixed on mine, and then turned to face the crowd. "My name is Laura," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "And this is my mother. A few days ago, people I considered family tried to convince me that she was a problem that needed to be solved. They tried to make me believe that a mother's love could be inconvenient, that a woman's dignity could be negotiable." She paused, taking a deep breath. I allowed that to happen. I failed as a daughter, as a woman, as a human being. But today, I'm here to say that my mother will never be a problem. She is my solution. She is my strength. She is my example. The silence in the square was absolute. Hundreds of people held their breath, witnessing a moment of reconciliation that transcended the personal to become universal. Laura turned to me, tears flowing freely down her face. "Mom," she said, her voice now firm and clear, "you will always have a place at our table, not just any place, but the place of honor. Because without you, none of this makes sense." The embrace we shared on stage, under the golden lights of the old lampposts and before hundreds of witnesses, was more than a reconciliation between mother and daughter. It was the reaffirmation that true love doesn't bow to social pressures, doesn't submit to fear, doesn't negotiate dignity for convenience. Peter approached us, his eyes also shining with emotion. "Without you too," he said, "without women like you, our city would be nothing. You are proof that female strength is capable of transforming not only families, but entire communities." The crowd erupted in applause, but it wasn't just approval, it was celebration. A celebration of courage, of dignity, of the transformative power of authentic love. People were crying, hugging, shouting words of encouragement. It was as if the entire city was participating in a collective catharsis. But not everyone was celebrating. Claudia had approached the stage, her face a mask of barely contained fury. She tried to climb up, but Peter stopped her with a firm gesture. "This isn't over," she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. The crowd began to boo, but I raised my hand, asking for silence. I didn't want her silenced in the same way they tried to silence me. Everyone deserves to be heard, even when their words reveal more about them than we'd like to see. "Claudia," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I didn't destroy any family. Families destroy themselves when they choose appearances over love, when they choose control over respect, when they choose fear over courage. If anything was destroyed here today, it was only the illusion that dignity can be negotiated." She looked at me with pure hatred, but she had no more arguments. Her strategy of control and manipulation had crumbled in the face of the strength of the genuine love between mother and daughter. Claudio appeared at her side, gently holding her arm. "Claudia," he said softly, but loud enough for us to hear, "enough. It's over." It was interesting to see my son-in-law at that moment. For all these years, I had seen him as a weak man, easily manipulated by his sister and social pressures. But there, before the crowd, he showed a dignity I didn't know he possessed. He turned to me and nodded respectfully. "Mrs. Agatha," he said, his voice carrying an apology that words couldn't fully express, "you will always be welcome in our home." Claudia looked at him with shock and betrayal, but he didn't back down. Perhaps he, too, had found his own courage that night. The festival continued for another 2 hours. There were musical performances, poetry readings, and speeches on culture and citizenship. But the most significant moment had already passed. The square had transformed into more than just an entertainment venue. It had become a symbol of resistance, dignity, and female empowerment. As people gradually dispersed, Peter, Laura, and I remained on stage, observing our city under the soft glow of the old lampposts. It was as if we were seeing everything with new eyes, not just as a place where we lived, but as a space we had helped to create, shape, and transform. "You know," said Peter, breaking the contemplative silence, "I always knew you were strong, Agatha, but tonight you showed me something beyond strength. You showed me what it means to be unbreakable." I looked at him, this man who had shared so many dreams and struggles with me. "It's not about being unbreakable, Peter. It's about being authentic. It's about not giving up who we are, even when it costs us dearly." Laura listened silently and then said something that surprised me. "Mom, I want you to teach me to be like you." "Like what?" "I want to learn to be fearless. I want to learn not to bow to pressure. I want to learn to be a woman who doesn't compromise her dignity." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I lost myself in these past few years. I transformed into someone I don't recognize, someone who's afraid of her own shadow, someone who apologizes for existing." I took my daughter's hands in mine. "Laura, you didn't lose yourself. You just strayed from the path. But paths always lead us back home, if we have the courage to acknowledge when we've gone the wrong way." We descended from the stage together and walked along the cobblestone streets towards my house. Peter accompanied us part of the way, but said goodbye at the corner, respecting the private moment between mother and daughter. "There's something I need to tell you," Laura said when we reached the front door. Claudio didn't act alone. She had the support of several influential people in town, including some politicians who see Peter as a threat. They thought that by controlling you, they could weaken his administration. "And what was your role in this strategy?" Laura lowered her eyes, ashamed. "I was supposed to convince you to step away from public life, to stop giving interviews, to cooperate with the harmony of the city. In return, Claudio would receive political support for future campaigns. And what changed? Last night, when I saw you being humiliated in my own home, I finally understood what I had become. I understood that I was betraying not only you, but everything that Dad and you taught me. I understood that I was selling my soul for an acceptance that would never be worth the price I was paying." We went inside and sat in the living room, where so many important conversations had taken place over the years. It was the same sofa where Laura did her homework as a child, where Renato and I planned the family's future, where Peter and other friends discussed cultural projects. "Mom," Laura said, I want to start over. I want our relationship to go back to what it was before. I want you to teach me to be strong like you. Strength isn't something that's taught, my daughter. Strength is something you discover within yourself when life forces you to choose between dignity and convenience. I paused, looking at this woman I had raised and who was trying to find her way back to herself. But I can teach you something more important than strength. I can teach you to love yourself enough to not accept disrespect, neither from strangers nor from family. We spent the night talking, reconnecting, rediscovering each other. Laura told me about the fears that led her to transform into someone she didn't recognize, about the constant pressure to fit into a world that wasn't hers, about the loneliness of living a life that didn't reflect her true values. I, in turn, shared with her the lessons I learned during the difficult years after her father's death, about how adversity can strengthen us instead of breaking us, about how dignity is a choice we make every day, especially in the most difficult moments. You know what hurt me most last night? I asked her. What? It wasn't the public humiliation. It wasn't even Claudia's cruelty. It was seeing you, my own daughter, allowing it to happen. It was realizing that I had failed to teach you that true love protects, it doesn't abandon. Laura started crying again. You didn't fail, Mom. I failed. I chose security over courage, acceptance over authenticity. But today, seeing you on stage, remembering who you've always been, I finally found the courage I had lost. Dawn found us still talking, mother and daughter rebuilding bridges that had been burned by fear and social pressure. When the sun finally rose, painting the sky gold, we both knew that something fundamental had changed between us. In the days that followed, the whole city talked about the festival. Regional newspapers covered the event, highlighting not only the cultural aspects, but also the moment of family reconciliation that had taken place on stage. Some articles focused on the message of female empowerment, others on the importance of dignity in family relationships. Claudia tried to counter the narrative, giving interviews where she presented herself as a victim of a coordinated political attack. But her words sounded hollow in the face of the authenticity of what people had witnessed in the square. There's no way to fake genuine emotion. There's no way to fabricate moments of profound truth. Claudio, on the other hand, surprised everyone by taking a firm stand. In a public statement, he declared his family's full support for his mother-in-law's right to freedom of speech and that he considered her participation in the city's cultural life a source of pride, not embarrassment. The statement caused a definitive rift between the siblings. Claudio felt betrayed and abandoned, unable to understand how her own brother had chosen the enemy side. But Claudio had finally found his own voice, his own courage, his own sense of dignity. Peter continued his work as mayor, but now with even greater popular support. The festival had become a symbol of resistance against attempts at silencing and control. His administration was now seen not only as competent, but as courageous, willing to defend the rights of all citizens regardless of political pressure. As for me, I discovered that my voice had become even more powerful after the events of that night. Journalists sought me out regularly, not only for comments on culture, but for opinions on dignity, family relationships, and female empowerment. I had become, unplanned, a kind of symbol of resistance for women who refused to be silenced. But the most profound transformation happened within my own family. Laura and Claudio began to build a new life, based on authentic values instead of social appearances. They moved to a smaller, simpler house, but one that reflected who they really were. Laura returned to work, something she had abandoned after marriage, and found fulfillment in educational projects for children from low-income families. Our Sunday dinners became a tradition again. Not the grand, formal events Claudia used to organize, but intimate and warm gatherings where conversation and laughter were more important than protocol and etiquette. Peter frequently joined us, bringing back the atmosphere of the old days when dreams and ideals were more valuable than status and power. 6 months after the festival, Laura came to visit me with news that would change everything again. She was pregnant. "Mom," she said, her hands instinctively moving to her still flat belly. "I want my child to grow up knowing the real grandmother, not a version edited to please others. I want him to learn from a young age that dignity is non-negotiable, that a true family protects and doesn't abandon, that authentic love demands courage." When I held my daughter at that moment, feeling the promise of a new life growing inside her, I understood that our journey had completed a cycle. From humiliation to empowerment, from separation to reconciliation, from silencing to amplified voice. But more importantly, from fear to courage, from submission to dignity, from appearance to authenticity. The baby was born 9 months later, a healthy boy who was named Renato, in honor of the grandfather he never knew, but whose values would live on through generations. On the day he turned 1 month old, we organized a small celebration at home. Peter was there, of course, now officially considered part of the family. Some former colleagues from the library, retired teachers, local artists, our true chosen family over the years. The table was laden, not with expensive delicacies, but with food made with love, prepared by hands that knew the value of authentic simplicity. At the end of the night, as I held my sleeping grandson in my arms, Laura approached me. "Mom," she whispered, "do you remember what you said on that terrible night about a true family being one that makes room at the table for everyone we love?" "I remember." "Look around," she said, gesturing gently so as not to wake the baby. "This is our true table. There are no empty places here. There are no outsider guests. There are only people who love each other, respect each other, protect each other." I looked around the room, seeing faces lit by conversation and affection, hearing genuine laughter and shared stories. Peter was telling an anecdote about the first festivals, making everyone laugh. Claudio was helping in the kitchen, something he never did in the days of social appearances. Old friends reconnected through memories and future projects. "You know what the biggest lesson I learned throughout this journey was?" I asked Laura. "What?" "That the empty table wasn't a punishment. It was an opportunity. It was the chance to discover who really mattered, who really loved me, who really deserved a place in my life." I paused, looking at my grandson's innocent face. Sometimes we need to be excluded from the fake tables to find our true table. Laura smiled, an expression of peace I hadn't seen on her face for years. "And now, my daughter, we've built a table so large that there will never again be an empty place for anyone who deserves to be here, and so strong that no one will ever be able to take us away from it." That night, after everyone had left and the house returned to silence, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, looking at the stars. I thought of Renato, wondering if he would be proud of the woman our daughter had become, of the strength she found to rebuild her life based on authentic values. I thought of all the women who had gone through similar situations, humiliated, silenced, forced to choose between dignity and acceptance. I thought of how many chose silence, how many gave up on themselves to keep the peace, how many lost themselves trying to fit into worlds that weren't theirs. But I also thought of how many found, like me, the courage to say no, how many discovered that dignity is a treasure that no one can take from us unless we voluntarily surrender it. How many learned that true family isn't about blood or marriage, but about respect, protection, and unconditional love. The night breeze carried the scent of the garden flowers that Renato had planted so many years ago. It was as if he were there, silently approving the choices we made, the strength we found, the dignity we preserved. My phone vibrated with a text message. It was from a woman I didn't know who had watched a video of the festival posted online. "Mrs. Agatha," the message read, Thank you for showing me that it's possible to be strong without being cruel, to love without submitting, to forgive without forgetting our own worth. Your story gave me the courage to leave a marriage where I was constantly humiliated. Today, for the first time in years, I feel proud of who I am. Tears streamed down my face, not of sadness, but of gratitude. Gratitude for finding the strength to resist, the courage to speak out, the wisdom to forgive without compromising my dignity. Gratitude for having a daughter brave enough to admit her mistakes and rebuild our relationship. Gratitude for having true friends who supported me when I needed it most. But mostly, gratitude for learning that our greatest strength doesn't come from our ability to avoid pain, but from our ability to transform it into wisdom, humiliation into dignity, exclusion into selectivity about who deserves our presence. When I finally stood up to go inside, I looked one last time at the distant square where the old lamppost still glowed softly in the darkness. Tomorrow would be a new day with new challenges, new opportunities to choose between dignity and convenience. But I was no longer afraid of those choices because I had learned the most important lesson of all, that an empty table is better than a false one, that temporary solitude is better than toxic company, that self-respect is the only kind of respect no one can take from us, and that sometimes life's greatest victories begin with its greatest humiliations, because it's only when we're forced to hit rock bottom that we discover we're capable of building a foundation strong enough to support not only ourselves, but all those we truly love. The table will never be empty again, because now I know exactly who deserves to sit at it.